A courier, K Narayan. The talkative man said, "Years and years ago, I had a shop. It was in those days when Lolly Extension was not what it is now. It consisted of less than 100 houses. Market Road being at least a mile off, the people living in the extension looked on me as a savior when I took up a little building, and on an auspicious day hung up a large board with the inscription, "The National Provision Stores." I went from house to house and secured orders. I literally examined every pantry in the extension and filled up the gaps. When the bell rang for midday interval at the extension elementary school, children swarmed into my shop and carried off whatever sweets, ribbons, and fancy stationery I happened to keep. I did about 25 rupees credit and 10 rupees cash sales every day. This gave us at least 50 rupees a month to live on. We paid a rent of 5 rupees and took a small house in Kabir Street, which was over a mile from my shop. I left at 7 in the morning and returned home only at 9 in the evening, after clearing the daily accounts. A year and a half passed thus. One day, a young fellow presented himself at my shop. He looked about 20, very fair and bright. He wore a spotless dhoti and shirt. "What can I do for you?" I asked, taking him to be a young customer. In answer, he brought his palms together in salute and said, "I need your help, sir. I will do whatever work you may give me in return for a little food and shelter and kindness." There was something in the young fellow's personality which appealed to me. Moreover, he had on his forehead 3 finger width of sacred ash and a dot of vermilion between his eyebrows. He looked as if he had just come from a temple. "I am very God-fearing, sir, and susceptible to religious influences." I spoke to him for about an hour. He said he belonged to a family of wealthy landholders in a village near Trichinopoli. His mother died some years before. His father took a mistress who ill-treated the boy, and consequently he ran away from home. A touching story, I felt. I directed him to my house. When I went home in the evening, I found that he had already made himself a great favorite there. His life story had deeply moved my wife. "So young," she whispered to me, "and to think that he should be left at this age without a father or a mother." She sighed. He had made himself lovable in a dozen ways already. He had taken my little son out for a walk. The youngster cried as soon as he came home, "Let Ramu stay in our house. He is great. He knows magic and can tame tigers and elephants." Ramu walked into the kitchen and offered assistance. At first, my wife protested. "Why won't you allow me to go near the oven, mother?" he asked. "Is it because you think I can't cook? Give me a chance and see." He made a dash for the bathroom, turned the tap on himself, and came out dripping. He took a handful of sacred ash and smeared it on his forehead. My wife was tremendously impressed. She let him do the cooking. He prepared delicious food for us. We were all very pleased. After that, he helped my wife with all the cleaning and scrubbing. He slept at night on the bare floor, refusing the mat and the pillow we offered. He was the first to be up next morning. He lit the stove and woke up my wife. At midday, He brought me my food. While I ate, he attended to the school children who came into the shop. He handed them their knickknacks with an expert hand. He charmed and amused them. He made them laugh. He beguiled them with an alternative when he had not on hand what they wanted. It was inevitable that in a month he should be sharing with me the shop work. He had attractive ways about him. Customers liked to talk to him. Within a short time, there was not a single home in the extension where he was not treated as a member of the family. He knew the inside story of every family. He served everyone to the best of his capacity. Here, he helped a man with his garden, and there he pleaded with a house building contractor and had an estimate revised. He patched up quarrels, he tamed truants and sent them to school. He took part in all the extracurricular activities of the Extension Elementary School. He took an interest in the club movement. He dressed himself up for the occasion when the inspector visited the school and arranged for the supply of garlands and flowers. And all this in addition to assisting me in the shop. He went every day to the market and purchased provisions from the wholesale merchants, sat down for hours on end in the shop and handed out things to customers, pored over the accounts till late at night and collected all the bills. As a result of Ramu's presence, my business increased nearly tenfold. I had abundant rest now. I left the shop entirely in his hands. I went home for food at midday. After that, I slept till 3 in the afternoon, and then I went to the shop but stayed there only till 5 o'clock, when I went to an open space nearby and played badminton with some friends. I came to the shop again only at 7 in the evening. Once or twice, I and my wife talked over the matter and tried to fix up a monthly pay for Ramu. We felt we ought not to be exploiting Ramu's friendliness. But when the subject was mentioned, Ramu was red in the face and said, "If you don't want me to stay with you anymore, you may talk of salary again." 5 years passed thus. He aged with us. He lived with us through all our joys and sorrows. I had 4 children now. My business had prospered enormously. We were now living in a bigger house, in the same street. I took the shop building on a long lease. I had an immense stock of all kinds of provisions and goods. I extended my business. I purchased large quantities of butter in all the nearby villages and sold them to butter and ghee merchants in Madras. This business gave me large profits. It kept me running between the villages and Madras. The shop was entirely in Ramu's hands. At Madras, I used to stop with a merchant in Georgetown. Once, work kept me on there a little longer than I had anticipated. One evening, just as I was starting out to post a letter for Ramu, a telegraph messenger stepped off his cycle and gave me an envelope. I tore open the cover and read, "Father dying of cholera, must go at once, return immediately, Ramu." The next morning at 5 o'clock, I got down at Malgudi. Ramu was at the station. He was going to Trichinopoli by the same train. The train halted only for a few minutes. Red-eyed and sobbing, Ramu said, "My father, cholera. Never thought he would get it." I consoled him. I had never seen him so broken. I said feebly, "He will be all right, don't worry." I had hardly the heart to ask him about the shop. He himself said, "I have handed the keys to mother and all the accounts and cash also. All right, all right. I will look toward it. Don't worry, I said. The guard blew his whistle. Ramu jumped into a third class compartment. The train jerked forward. He put his head out of the window and said, I will be back by tomorrow night train if my father gets better. Whatever happens, I won't be away for more than 15 days. He too has asked me to bring him. His voice and face receded. A wooden elephant on wheels. Please tell him I will surely bring it. My namaskarams to mother. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Even long after the train had left the platform, he was still looking out of the window and gesticulating to indicate, I will surely be back soon. Having some unfinished Madras business on hand, I could hardly go near the shop for a week. When I reopened, the first thing that I noticed was that the shop was empty. Except for a bag of coarse rice and a few bars of cheap soap, all the racks and containers were empty. I picked up the books and examined them. The entries were all in a mess. I put them away. Replenishing the stock was more urgent. I made out a list and went to the market. Sadiq said, my wholesale supplier, squatted amidst his cushions and welcomed me warmly. I owed my start in life to the unlimited credit he allowed me. After some preliminary, inconsequential talk, I put before him the list. He scrutinized it gloomily and shook his head. He said, you want goods for about 300 rupees. I wouldn't advise you to put up your dues. Why don't you take 50 rupees worth now? I am suggesting this only for your own convenience. This was the first time in my life that he had spoken to me in this manner, and he explained, don't mistake me, friend. You are a businessman, so am I. No use talking indirectly and vaguely. I will tell you what the matter is. Your account with us stands at rupees 3,500. And if you had paid at least a single installment for these 3 months, we should have felt happier. But Seth, last month I sent 400 to be given to you, and the month before 350, and the month before there must be only a balance of. He took out his ledger. There was only one payment made for 4 months when the bill stood at about 1,000. After that, there had been purchases almost every day for about 40 rupees. The young fellow that said that business was brisk and that you'd clear the accounts when you returned from Madras. My head swam. I will see you again, I said, and went back to the shop. I once again examined the books. The pages showed a lot of arrears to be collected. Next day, I went round to collect all my bills. People looked surprised. There must be some mistake. We paid our bills completely a fortnight ago. Otherwise, Ramu wouldn't leave us in peace. My wife said, in your absence, he was coming home nearly at 12 every night. He used to tell me that the accounts kept him late. How was business today? I unfailingly asked every day. He replied, business is good, bad, good and bad. Don't worry, leave it all to me. I will manage. An old man of lolly extension asked me, where is that boy you had? I told him. Look here, the old man said, keep this to yourself. You remember there lived next door to us those people from Hyderabad? Yes, yes. Your boy was gadding about with them a little too much. You know, there was a tall, pretty girl with them. Your fellow was taking her out every evening in a taxi. He closed the shop promptly at 6 in the evening. Those people went back to Hyderabad a few days ago. Later on, I made inquiries in Market Road and learned that Ramu had stitched 4 tweed suits, 18 silk shirts, and other clothes worth about 100 rupees. Purchased leather suitcases, 4 pairs of pump shoes, 2 pairs of velvet slippers, a wristwatch, 2 rings, a brooch, silk saris, blouse pieces, and so on. I got in touch with a near relative of Ramu's employed in a bank in Madras. I learned that his old father was hale and hearty, and there was no mention of cholera. Above all, Ramu was never known to have visited Trichinopoly. His whereabouts were unknown. The letter concluded. Someone recently returned from a tour mentioned that he thought he caught a glimpse of Ramu in a large gathering during some music festival in Hyderabad. He was, however, not very certain about it. I sold my shop and everything, paid off my creditors, and left Malgudi. I was a bankrupt with a wife and 4 children to support. We moved from place to place, living on the charity of friends, relatives, and unknown people. Sometimes nobody would feed us, and we threw ourselves down in a dark corner of some rest house. And my ragged children cried till sleep overcame them. I need not weary you with an account of my struggles. It is another story. I must tell you about Ramu. I have to add only this about my own career. 4 years later, I came across a coffee estate owner in Lampi Hills, and he gave me a fresh start. And I must say, thanks to him, I have done very well indeed in the coffee trade. Now about Ramu. A year ago, I was panting up the steps of Tirupati Hills. I had a vow to fulfill at the temple. I had passed 2,000 steps when a familiar voice assailed my ears from among the groups of mendicants lining the steps. I stopped and turned, and there he was. I could hardly recognize him now. I had seen him off at Malgudi station 10 years before. His face was now dark, scarred, and pitted. His eyes were fixed in a gaze. I should have passed him without noticing if he hadn't called out for alms. His voice was still unchanged. I stopped and said, "Look here. I can't see. I am blind." "Who are you? Where do you come from?" I asked in a voice which I tried to disguise with a little gruffness. "Go, go your way. Why do you want to know all that?" he said. I had often boasted that if I met him, I would break his bones first. But this was not at all how I had hoped to see him again. I felt very confused and unhappy. I dropped a coin on his upraised palm and passed on. But after moving up a few steps, I stopped and beckoned to another beggar sitting by his side. He came up. I held up an anna coin before him and said, "You may have this if you will tell me something about that blind man." "I know him," said this beggar, who had no arms. "We keep together. He has arms but no eyes. I have eyes but no arms. And so we find each other helpful. We move about together. He is not a beggar like me, but a sannyasi. He came here 2 years ago. He had once much money in Hyderabad, Delhi, Banaras, or somewhere. Smallpox took away his sight. His wife, a bad sort, deserted him. He is vexed with the world. Some pilgrims, coming from the north, brought him here. But surely you won't tell him I have spoken all this. He becomes wild if those days are mentioned. I went back to Ramu, stood before him, and watched him for a moment. I felt like shouting, Ramu, God has punished you enough. Now come with me. Where is your sweetheart? Where is my money? What devil seized you? But I checked myself. I felt that the greatest kindness I could do him was to leave him alone. I silently placed the rupee on his outstretched palm and raised up the steps. At the bend, I turned my head and had another look at him. And that was the last I saw of him. For when I returned that way 4 days later, he was not to be seen. Perhaps he had moved on to another place with his armless companion.